Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, good evening to the City of Cypress and all of you joining us here this evening. Thank you for coming. This evening is the second of 3 public forums to educate and discuss the city's election systems. This is an important conversation, and my fellow council members are eager to hear from you. Tonight is about listening to the questions and the comments from the community. Our program is being simulcast in both Korean and Spanish. If you need translations, please use the headphones that are located on the back tables. But first, I'd like to introduce my colleagues who are joining us tonight. Mayor Pro Tem Ann Hertz-Mallory, Councilmember Francis Marquez, Councilmember Scott Minicus, and Councilmember John Pete. Finally, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Ariana Barrios. She's the Executive Director of the OC Forum and the council member in the City of Orange. Ariana, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Morales. It's nice to be back with you. So this evening, as the mayor had already said, we have a very important discussion. We're going to do several things, and that includes we're going to provide you, the residents, members of our community, with an overview of Cypress's current election process. We're going to describe and tell in more detail what the Cvra, or California Voting Rights Act, is and what it does and the challenge that the City of Cypress has received. And most importantly, we're going to allow the community an opportunity to ask questions, and we have a myriad of ways that they can do that. To begin our discussion, the city has created a short video, which I'm going to play in just a moment, that has some solutions, talks a little bit more in detail, and some potential outcomes. Following the video, we will open the floor to questions, and as I said, there's several ways to do that. First of all, if you'd like to speak here tonight, it is a community open public forum. There is a microphone right in the middle of in the center aisle if you want to come up and just give your name and do a comment during Q&A. Also at the front table outside in the hallway, there were also comment cards. If you would prefer to just write a comment and turn it in, we'll read it. And if you're a little shy about going up to the microphone, we also have several online methods that you can do public comment or send in a question. So those include, you can text our dedicated hotline, and that number is area code 714-699-3607. Once again, dedicated text line for 714-699-3607. You can also send us an email, and that email address is Cvra Forum, F-O-R-U-M, at cypressca.org. And finally, if you are watching on Facebook Live this evening, you can insert a question into the comments. So with that, we will prepare for your questions and your comments, and you can also finally find more information about this entire process and when our next meeting is by going to the city's website at cypressca.org/election system. And with that, we're going to watch the video.
Let's go. Thank you very much.
The City of Cypress welcomes you to our public forum in this discussion about the city's election systems. In this presentation, we will provide the following information: an overview of federal and state legislation related voting rights and protections, an explanation of the California Voting Rights Act, known as the Cvra, an overview of the Cvra violation inquiry the City of Cypress has received, an overview of current and potential voting systems the city is reviewing, a brief review of the city's most recent election history, and provide several ways for residents to share their comments and feedback. The Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965 was landmark legislation that was born out of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The legislation enforces the 14th and 15th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution that guarantee equal protection under the law and instituted national protections for voting rights. The Act prohibits any state or local government from imposing voting laws that result in discrimination against racial or language minorities. Examples of past voter discrimination include imposing restrictions on an individual's ability to vote, such as the requiring of literacy tests, moral character tests, or poll taxes. In 1985, the Supreme Court ruled that there are 3 conditions that must be met to prove minority voters have had their rights violated. Number 1, the affected minority group is sufficiently large enough to elect a representative of its choice in a specific geographic location. Number 2, that the minority group is politically cohesive and would likely vote similarly. And number 3, the white majority voters vote sufficiently as a bloc to usually defeat the minority group's preferred candidates. The California Voting Rights Act, or CVRA, expands upon the Federal Voting Rights Act. The CVRA provides additional statewide protections for Californians. The most significant being that the CVRA makes it easier for minority groups to prove their votes are being diluted by at-large elections. The CVRA eliminated one of the 3 federal conditions needed to prove voter disenfranchisement: that the affected minority group is sufficiently large enough to elect a representative of its choice in a specific geographic location. This difference between the federal and state law makes it easier for plaintiffs to assert that a violation has taken place and issue a challenge letter or file a lawsuit against local governments. Such challenges typically seek the elimination of an at-large elections system where it is asserted that a voting rights violation has taken place. It is important to note that when plaintiffs are successful, the local agency must initiate the process to transition its election system within 90 days. Since its passage in 2002, CVRA has promoted 2 decades of change in the California election process. In all, 216 school districts, 34 community college districts, 137 cities, 35 water and other special districts, and all county boards of supervisors statewide are now electing representatives by district. Prior to 2002, only 29 of California's 482 cities elected council members by district. In less than 20 years, that number has jumped to more than 160. Many of the jurisdictions noted here transitioned to by-district elections voluntarily, but others have changed after receiving a CVRA challenge notification. In September 2021, Cypress received a challenge letter on behalf of the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project and its members residing in the city of Cypress. The challenge alleges that the city's current at-large election system for city council is racially polarizing and results in the vote dilution specifically of Asian voters. The challenge asserts that the city is in violation of the CVRA. CVRA challenges are complex and difficult to defend. They can also be very expensive to the defendant. When cities lose such challenges, they are responsible for both their own legal expenses and those of the plaintiff. The city of Cypress is currently assessing the merits of the CVRA challenge. To date, the city has not found any merit to the allegation that it is in violation of the law. The City Council is carefully reviewing its current electoral process and is seeking expert advice on next steps. This includes an initial demographic study of the city's population, past election history, and willingness to defend against a challenge. The city is also seeking community input through these public forums. Furthermore, in many cases, cities that have not changed the election process voluntarily faced formal lawsuits that changed the election process involuntarily and without community input. All of these elements are being reviewed and weighed as part of the deliberative process. The decision the City Council must make is whether to remain in an at-large election system or transition to a by-district election system. The City of Cypress currently utilizes the at-large election process. What are at-large elections? In an at-large election, candidates campaign for elections citywide. All Cypress voters elect all the council members. For example, if 3 council seats are up for election, Cypress voters select 3 candidates. Candidates may live anywhere in Cypress. Candidates who are elected represent the entire city. It is important to note that at-large election systems are typically the trigger for a CVRA challenge. Alternatively, if Cypress holds district elections, the city may be equally divided by population into city council districts. Voters will no longer be able to vote for all of the seats on the city council, as occurs with the current at-large election system. Instead, they will only be able to vote for the seat that represents their particular district. In addition, candidates must live in the district which they hope to represent. Candidates run and campaign in the district where they live, not citywide. District voters choose one candidate to represent them. For example, if 3 council seats are up for election, voters select one candidate to represent their district. Voters in other districts would do likewise. Because not all districts are up for election at the same time, there may be some years where cities do not have a city council election. There are several different types of district elections, and as previously noted, single-member district elections are the most common. Voters in a district elect a single candidate to represent them. Other examples include the Orange Unified School District, which utilizes an at-large, by-district process. All voters may vote for all open seats on the ballot regardless of trustee area. However, candidates must live in the trustee area they hope to represent. Another example, cumulative voting, means voters may cast as many votes as there are seats up for the election. For example, if 3 seats are up for the election, a voter may cast all 3 votes for a single candidate or distribute those 3 votes among multiple candidates. The candidates with the highest cumulative number of votes are elected. Should the city decide to change its current process, there are many district options to review. In the months to come, the City Council must determine whether it wishes to defend or accept the challenge. In either case, the City of Cypress will seek public input and feedback from the community. It is important to the Council that community voices are heard. This community input will include a robust community outreach effort, multiple public forums, and online information. Following this public input process, the City Council will begin their formal deliberations, which will include public hearings as part of regular City Council or special meetings, final deliberations, and a vote by the City Council at a regular or special meeting. The City of Cypress is not alone in this issue. As noted previously, many cities have changed their voting systems in the past 2 decades. Many others have opted to defend against CVRA challenges, but the cost can be high. To date, Santa Monica has spent more than $10 million in legal fees defending against their CVRA challenge. If they are unsuccessful, they will also be responsible for the plaintiff's legal fees by CVRA mandate. Based on the initial assessment by the demographer, it has not been established that Cypress is in violation of the CVRA. This is not unusual. Many cities have faced similar issues. The demographer examined the city's demographics and all city council elections from 2012 to 2020. In the initial assessment, the demographer noted that there are few precincts to analyze, from a maximum of 63 to a low of 36. That previous elections all involve voters with multiple votes and many candidates. And that there are no homogeneous Asian voter precincts. The maximum precinct has only 35.5% Asian voters. This means the estimates are not reliable and require further study and more data. As part of the deliberative process, the City Council will discuss the matter fully. Next steps may include a more detailed and in-depth demographic analysis. However, even when inconclusive, cities are presumed to be in violation unless they can prove otherwise. As previously shown, the cost to defend and possibly lose a CVRA challenge are very high, often running in the millions of dollars. According to the most recent 2020 census data, Cypress is a diverse community with a total population of 50,151. As shown by our current demographics, the Cypress community is comprised of primarily whites, Asian Pacific Islanders, and Latinos. The following Cypress election history underscores the complexities of the issue. The city's CVRA challenge specifically referenced Asian voters and the possibility of racially polarized voting and/or vote dilution for this protected class. Using historical election data, a demographer conducted an initial study to ascertain if a violation had occurred relative to Asian voters. In Cypress's case, the data is unclear. For example, in the 2020 and 2018 elections, candidates who won were favored by voters overall, including Asian voters in at least one instance. However, in each of these years, there was also one other candidate who was preferred by Asian voters who was not elected. Because not all candidates preferred by Asian voters lost, the results are deemed inconclusive. If Cypress chooses to move to district elections, the city is committed to an open and transparent process. A public process would begin to draw the maps outlining each district. Map drawing tools would be available online for anyone to create a map for consideration. Public meetings would be held to explain the guidelines and principles for drawing a map. Maps can also be created during these public meetings. With public input, similar maps may be combined. Typically, 3 or 4 final maps may emerge for public comment and council deliberation. Several key principles are used in the districting process. Districts must include communities of interest, be compact, be contiguous, have visible natural or man-made boundaries, include respect for past voter selections, and plan for future growth. CVRA challenges may impose additional considerations during the districting process. When a CVRA challenge is issued asserting minority dilution, that population will be taken into special consideration when districts are created. When possible, a majority, minority, or plurality district will be created to ensure those voters' preferences are not diluted. It is not always possible to craft such a district if, for example, the minority group is dispersed throughout the city. So, what are the characteristics of the at-large election system? First, all voters vote on all available city council seats. City council candidates can live in any part of the city. And the elected city council members represent the entire city and answer to all city voters. Alternatively, in a by-district election system, voters elect a single district representative. Candidates must live in the district they are running to represent, and the elected city council members represent their local district on the city council and answer to their district voters. The city is very interested in hearing from the community during this public outreach period. To submit a comment or question, you may do so during the public forums. You may also submit a question online to the city email address cvraforum@cypressca.org. In addition, the city has created an online survey, and you may visit the city's website to participate. This is an important and momentous decision for our city, and it is only through the participation of all Cypress residents that our City Council can make an informed and judicious decision as we plan for our municipal future. You can learn more at www.cypressca.org/election-system. This is an important and momentous decision for our city, and it is only through the participation of all Cypress residents that our City Council for our city, and it is only through the participation of all Cypress residents that our City Council can make an informed and judicious decision as we plan for municipal future. You can learn more at www.cypressca.org.
My apologies that the AV system is always a little touchy. So, Mr. Mayor and honorable members of the City Council, as you heard, I hope this gives a really good overview of kind of what we're facing right now. Sorry, it's better? You're changing me out? Excuse me. As I like to say, I got a guy. Okay. Testing. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So what we're going to do before we go to the Q&A portion is we really should remind everyone how they can either put in a comment or ask a question at this time, Mr. Mayor.
That's right, Ariana. So we want to remind everyone how they can participate. So first, you can complete a question card, which is located at the back table or even outside in the hallway. There are those. Again, you can make a text message or send your question via text to the dedicated line, which is area code 714-699-3607. Or you can send an email to Cvra, which is the California Voting Rights Act, Cvra Forum at cypressca.org.
All right, so first I will ask if anyone in the room has a question, if they'd like to come up to the microphone and make a comment or bring a question at this time. No? Okay, and I will check. Oh, yes, please. And would you mind stating your name?
My name is Wayne Como, and I live in Cypress. I'm interested to know, are you actually considering pursuing fighting this with the potential of losing millions of dollars? And I also think that having the new type of election process where we have a representative in like 5 different districts in the city would be more equitable to the people in the city of Cypress, because it would allow people to have representation in their particular area in the community. It would discourage the council from putting all the negative aspects of a city in one area and avoiding their own districts, because everybody would have a district. That's just my opinion. I think it's foolish to try and fight this, because spending millions of dollars to me is a big mistake. Anyway, that's what I think about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Koa, so much for kicking us off, and a great question. And I think that that's part of what we're here tonight to do, is that your city council is here to listen. Particularly, everybody has a different opinion, has a different point of view, so it gives them a chance to write those down, get answers, and come back as they go into the final deliberative process. So what that means is that following this series of community meetings, they will make a final decision whether or not to defend against the challenge or to actually go ahead and voluntarily go into districts. And then there is a process after that that is dictated by law about how we make districts in the city. So it's very procedural, but that decision has yet to be made, and that's why they're asking you for your opinion. So I appreciate that. Anybody else like to come up and ask a question? Thank you so much, and if you could state your name as well.
Sure. I'm Gail Como, or actually formerly Mary Gail Como on my voter's card, okay? Related to this guy here. Can you tell me what are the numbers? We're looking at a total population of 50,151, and you may have shown it on the screen, but I didn't get it. What are the numbers who identify as white, Asian, Latino? Because those are the 3 big groups.
And you know what's really interesting, and that is a great question, so if I'm hoping everyone at home heard it, but the census has changed up a little bit how we look at race and ethnicity, but it works out to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, to be approximately a third, and a third in terms of like the biggest groups within the city.
The white community is the largest group. The Asian group is second, and that has gone from between 35 and 39%. The Hispanic group comes in third, and then we have a number of other cultures that fill in the 100%.
And in order to get the specifics on that, in the PowerPoint presentation, which is available online on the city's website, where that actual census data comes from, the link is right there. So you can pull it and see exactly for yourself how that breaks out individually.
Because is there really a white majority block, voting block, then, if it's so evenly divided?
And in terms of the city, do you mean?
Yeah.
So, Mrs. Como, one of the things that comes up, so again, it is not a very easy thing to just say, you're right, Mr. Como, you're right, going back to yours as well. Correct, it wouldn't make sense to fight it and knowing that we're going to expend thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars. You're absolutely right. Part of the problem that comes with this is there's information, and which is why we're telling you, and there's that link, to look the information up yourself. We've had people that have used numbers from the previous census. We have the most current census. We'll even have people that'll make reference to what the city was like when it first started, which of course is very different when we had livestock that outnumbered the number of residents. And as lighthearted as that might be, that still is a very serious point, because a lot of what we're doing here is trying to get information to both the residents and to obtain information from the residents as well, not just give it out, but to receive the information and the direction you'd like. And it is more involved still. Some people just still don't understand what the purpose of it is. When we hear some of the comments that we've received, whether it be online or when we had the very first forum, you have people that says, well, Cypress, we're not racist. No, we're not. But if by agreeing to the letter, to some people it suggests that we're rolling over and that it says that we are, so fight it. Well, again, there's many more issues than that. And that's all a part of what this is. And then going back to, again, I'm sorry I'm bouncing between you and Mr. Como, but Mr. Como, you talked about districts. We don't even know how many districts. That's down the road. If we choose to do that, we don't know if it's 3, 4, 5, 6 districts. It just depends on how that breaks up. People have asked, will we take input? Yes, we're going to take lots of input. There's a lot of things, but that's down the line still. Right now, we're just trying to get the input from the residents.
And I did want to add, specific to your question, when a city, and this is the case in point with Santa Monica, why they were having so many issues, and Mission Viejo right here in Orange County, is that the populations of ethnic minority groups within their city weren't large enough to create single-member districts that represented them well. And there was a there's disbursement in the community. So what they looked at was actually, and Santa Monica is looking at this now, is doing what we said in the video was cumulative voting, where you might not be broken up into districts, but you'd actually have a different voting system that would allow for ethnic minority groups and underrepresented groups to have a better chance of electing their own representatives. And those types of systems are looked at specifically when there isn't an easy district that you can make by carving out a district. So those questions will be part of the process if you choose not to defend against the CVRA challenge. So you'll have a couple of decisions. The council will have a couple of decisions to make. One, do you go to districts? Do you look at a different type of system that allows for better representation? So there's still a lot of questions to go.
Yeah, all that being said, I am in favor of geographical districts, just from the standpoint that I feel like the north end of the city and the far south end of the city has often been underrepresented.
Well, and that's also part of what we're going to look at. To say geographical is quick, it's easy. The problem is, does that do a fair representation?
Right.
Remember
Yeah,
that,
I
and again,
understand.
you've been here, not a lot of years, I'm not going to throw that out there, but you've been here a while. And so you remember that the north part of our city used to be unincorporated Orange County. And then we annexed that portion, and that really changed the demographics of our city, our layout, the area, the different types, the how. I mean, there were many things. So to say that you'd like a geographic, you're right, that's a good idea. That's one way. But then we have to look at, by breaking it up geographically, does that create a fair district or a fair distribution of where everyone is and those particular representation, excuse me.
I understand.
And that's why the
difficult with
the pillars of districting and the principles of districting are really important to understand. Because while they do offer the opportunity to look at geographic areas and ask for boundaries to be made as very recognizable boundaries within any city. So for example, in the city that I live in Orange, Old Town Orange, the historic district, is considered a very recognizable area, geographic area. So they built around that in some of the other areas. In Cypress, it may be a little bit more difficult to do that when you're also looking at population, you're also looking at communities of interest. So, and communities of interest can be kind of tricky when you're drawing those districts and trying to make everything as even and as fair as possible.
Yeah, I understand if the population is very evenly dispersed throughout all the geographic areas.
And one of the last things that a lot of people forget about when you're talking about districts and CVRA is that it also needs to plan for the future. And when the mayor mentioned that we're looking at a new census data right now, and you can actually see from the previous census to now where the population trends are going. So if districts are chosen or whatever form of voting is chosen, we also have to plan ahead, look ahead to the next 10 years.
And that these districts are looked at every 10 years.
Absolutely.
So that if we do that, let's just say 2022, the time of the next census in 2030, we'll be looking at possibly redrawing those districts again. Part of where that also comes from is, where is our city headed for the future? These recent requirements by the state, RENA, the acronym for the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. The state is telling us we have to add so many more units, so many more living quarters to our city. Well, the council, we're already standing around, city staff, where are we going to put those? Well, that's very important when it comes to where will those ultimately go and how will it play out in the districts. So, and again, it's going to go back, and I'm sorry, I'm hoping I'm not digressing too much on your question, but one of the things that came up by some of the people says, well, you're dragging your feet. This should be a simple decision. Well, as evident by the number of questions and the number of things that people still come up and ask, it really is not so simple.
And I also just wanted to give everybody a chance. Is there any other question we can answer for you? Thank you so much, Mrs. Como. Anybody else in the room? Yes, sir. And I do want to note too, in the video that you saw, we mentioned that there was a survey. There are QR code links out on the back table. We also have the printed FAQs that were on the city's website, so I encourage you to grab those on your way out or grab them now so you can look through them. Sir, can you please share your name?
Yeah, my name is Hank Mockel. Been in the community most all of my life. My wife, definitely most all of hers. There's quite a lot to unpack here, and I'm learning most of this tonight. So in the things that I've read, I do have a couple of questions. Southwest Voter Registration Education Project. Is this something that these folks do regularly, other cities? I mean, is this kind of their job? They've sent this to us, but was this originated from community members?
Well, I don't want to be disparaging of them in any way, but I do want to, I can say quite truthfully that the law firm of Howard Shankman and the Southwest Voter Registration Education Group are typically, so far that we know of lawsuits, have been the lead plaintiffs. Okay.
I again want to echo some of what we've heard in the length of time that I've been in the city, and we'll use the two probably largest groups that we have, white and Asian. There seem to be very diverse amongst the community. So I'm actually in opposition to rolling over onto using the term rolling over or accepting this challenge. I'm in opposition to it. One last question that I have. Let's say, for instance, we do end up going to a district, and in the area that I am in that district, am I to understand that I now can only vote for candidates that run within that district?
That is correct.
That would be correct.
So whereas now in at-large, if there are 3 seats open, you get 3 votes. You can vote any way you'd like for those representatives. And in a single-member district, you may have several people running, but you only vote for one within your district to represent your district.
And in election cycles, you may not even have a vote that particular year. Let's use the simple numbers. Let's say we have 5 districts because we currently have 5 council members. If in the upcoming year, this one, 3 of us term out, you'll be voting for 3 people. Well, if that's not one of the districts you live in, then you won't be voting in that particular election. So it just depends on how all of that plays out.
Barring any additional information, I stand in opposition. Thank you.
Understood.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
comments. Would anyone else like to make a comment or ask a question? Yes, please. And I do have a number, Mr. Mayor,
Okay.
that have come through the text line
Yeah.
and online.
And I'll also point something out. We had a gentleman last night speak at the council meeting talking about this, and that's why it is not such a simple thing that we should have already acted on. This particular gentleman pointed out that he is Asian, but also pointed out that as a Philippine, he is not the same as Korean or Japanese or Chinese or any of the other ethnicities that make up the Asian population. And that's a valid point. I fall into the same category, Hispanic or Latino. Where my family originates from is not the same as the many others that make up that group, and that's why it is difficult. It isn't something so black and white or something so simple. So anyway, yes, ma'am.
In my youth, I worked for the city of Anaheim in their planning and zoning. So my gray cells are being dusted off by the complications that are involved. So I do understand what's going on, and that was a few years back. But I have a question, and I'm kind of like curious about how this will alter redistricting, and that's Proposition 9 and 10. How will they affect, by percentages, how will this affect what's going on redistricting?
Well, we don't know because we don't have the final numbers. We don't really know where the districts are laid out because, again, that's not anything. One of the things the demographer said, and that was in the PowerPoint, when we had a chance to speak with him and he laid out, as an example, here's our city map. And part of what the California Voter Rights Act, or actually the Federal Voting Rights Act, shows that if you have a particular area of a city where a particular minority group is large enough to have representation but gets voted out by the balance of the city, then you have that problem. So the demographer tells us, but Cypress, when we look at your Asian population, it's pretty well scattered and dispersed throughout the city. You don't have a particular area. Okay, well, if this entire issue has to deal with that the Asian population hasn't been properly represented, that they're not getting a chance to elect their representative, their chosen representative, how do we draw a district that gives them that opportunity? Well, that's still, again, further down the line when we get to that point. But to answer the question, we don't know yet. We're still, that's a lot for us to do. We, again, will take the input from the public. That's one of the things we're doing here. But we don't know how those districts are going to play out. We don't know if there's going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, or however many. It just depends on how that breaks down.
But I think it's important to note too, especially since you mentioned Anaheim. I was actually working in Anaheim when they went through their Cvra challenge and then went to districts. Anaheim is 4 times the size of Cypress.
If not bigger.
But when they did the initial assessment, demographic assessment, it was very clear that there were 2 areas of the city, and one in particular, where minority votes, particularly of Latinos, was being diluted, and that they were not having an opportunity to elect their representatives to the council. In my own city, in Orange, same thing. We had a Cvra challenge. We did the initial assessment. It was very clear in the 2 historic Latino barrios that we have in our city that their votes were being diluted. And it was difficult. It took a long time, but we were able to get to districts very simply with very recognizable boundaries, but 10 years later, or after the census, we're changing those again. So it's not always as clear cut. It is a very difficult process to go through.
I have another concern, and that is, where I live, I love it, and over a certain area, there's a lot of Filipino in there, and I know, because I've been to the Philippines, this is their community. So is a line gonna be drawn right there and split that community? That's not, a good thing. And also, I do know the difference between the different Asians, the ethnics, and I love it. And to separate this community is not fair to the Asian community. When you divide, the Chinese, Japanese, or Korean and the Asian, it's not cool. They have their own neat stuff going on, and it really should be respected and not divided.
Thank you very
Agreed.
much for your comments.
Thank you.
We appreciate you coming forward and speaking. Anybody else would like to? Yes, sir. I'm going to turn on the lights back here while you do that. Or not.
Careful of dropping the mic. This is Glenn Button. My wife and I, we've been residents of this wonderful city for over a quarter of a century, and just really appreciate the fact that this is a warm, welcoming city. And it's not a huge city. It's not a Long Beach. It's not a Santa Ana. It's not an Anaheim. We're a small and, as you've mentioned, in many ways more homogeneous. New York City's got their boroughs, and that makes sense for them. I'm trying to think, if we were to, hypothetically, break the city up into 5 districts, boroughs, whatever, that takes our ability to vote for the direction of the city as each citizen from voting every 2 years to voting every 4 years when our district happens to come up. Is there any advantage to that?
That's a tough one, and I think it's a very good question, and I think it's one that we probably need to dig deeper into and get maybe some better answers for you, because we have the opportunity to go back to the demographer and ask some of those questions. And what you suggest right there is also one of the reasons why it may not be actual districts. It may be it's the cumulative voting, because it's not as easy. But that way you vote as a city. But you have a choice. You still get all 3 votes, but how you choose to use them is completely up to you. So if you heard in the video, you could take your 3 votes and give them to 1 candidate, or you could give them to 3 candidates. So that could be your choice. So that is an exceptional, that is an acceptable version of voting that keeps the dilution at a minimum, if not completely erases it. So there's some alternatives there as well. But I think number one is that for the city council and all the council members and your mayor and your city staff is that we want this conversation to keep going and to be respectful, that we all have very different opinions and we need to listen to each other.
Agreed. In just the time, again, in listening to the PowerPoint and the information that we have, we received this letter back in September of last year. Okay, so almost 5 months ago. And you'll have people that'll say, you're dragging your feet. And that's one of the comments I clearly heard. And I responded, absolutely not. It takes time, and the time to get information out, to contact people, to talk to people. You had Hank, who even told us, look, this is the first time he's hearing more information about it. And we know that. And we know that there are a lot of people. We also know that there's a lot of misinformation. We also know that people don't really know where to get the information. And so we're trying to put that out. It is not a simple one. If it was as simple as, let's go ahead and give in before we start spending the millions, absolutely. But it is not that simple, because you do have people of this the varied opinions.
And I'll speak as one of the many citizens of our city that I'm very grateful, very appreciative of the council, of each of you, taking the time to meet with us as the citizens and gather input. I had the opportunity to work with the City of Orange Leadership Association and many fine people there, so thank you for participating as well. But the Cvra challenge, that whole, you may not be able to speak to it as a California issue, but it seems like it's a problem, a solution looking for a problem. The complaint comes from a law firm that's basically attacking, and I'll use that word, but they seem to be coming against cities across the state with no evidence of any wrongdoing, of any need for what they're advocating. Am I mistaken on that?
Well, I don't think either of us could necessarily comment on that directly, but I would go back to saying that there are many differing opinions on that. So we're not going to necessarily answer that, but I think the other important thing is that is the difference in the CVRA from the Federal Voting Rights Act. When we talk about that, it removes one of the Federal Voting Rights Act premises of that there has actually been a violation, and that is the geography. And why is that so big? Because if you remove geography from the equation, then all of a sudden where you may have a very strong minority group within a city, for example, but they're dispersed, how do you carve a district to that? Removing geography from that and allows the CVRA to be much easier to be met in terms of violations. So in that case, there are other options for voting. That's where cumulative and some other concepts like the one in Orange Unified come in, where you can do by district at large. So just making sure that people have the opportunity to have their voices heard.
So I'll close by again saying thank you for meeting with us. Thank you for taking your time, not for rushing into anything. Thank you for carefully considering the numerous facets of this kind of an issue. I think that caution, prudence, being very careful about this and not rushing into anything. I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Harumi, and I live in the city of Cypress for a very, very long time. And for all the council members, thank you so much for keeping up with this city of Cypress. You guys do a beautiful job. But as far as redistricting, as a resident of Cypress, when I vote, I would like to vote for the city of Cypress, not a piece of Cypress. And I would like to be represented by a body of city council. So I'm against this redistricting. Thank you.
Ma'am, thank you so much for sharing. Would you mind sharing your name? Would that be all right? Thank you. So we had a couple more questions. Some of them we have already answered. For example, can we know who in Cypress issued the complaint? And that was the Southwest Voter Education Group. And the next question, this is from Val Mallory. I think I got that right, yes?
Yes.
Okay. What was the Asian voter turnout in the last election in percent and absolute numbers? That is a fantastic question. I do not have the exact numbers of those. But Val, what we will do is we will get the answers to this and we will put it on the city website as part of the FAQs because it's very good. It's a very good question. So we will make sure that we answer that. The next one is also from Val. Was there a specific election named in the complaint? And no, there was not, to my knowledge. It was a general.
So it basically cited that the manner in which the city council selected a replacement for Councilwoman Berry, Mayor Pro Tem Berry, when she stepped down in relocating to Arizona. You had a number of people that felt that we should simply select the person who came in third place in the November 2020 election, and that would have been Carrie Hayashida, Asian. And we, as indicated in the charter, that is one way, but another way, the process is spelled out as to how to name the replacement. We had even on that very same ballot of November 2020 asked the citizens of Cypress if we should come up on this, and of course this is well before Councilwoman Berry Mayor Pro Tem Berry had stepped down, if we should have to ever find a replacement. The current is 30 days. 60 days is the time we would need in order to properly go through the process. Okay, so those quick numbers, 6,000, we kept hearing how Ms. Hayashida had 6,000 votes. She did. But at the same time, on the same ballot, there were 16,000 Cypress voters that it approved extending that measure to give us 60 days. So if you remove the 6,000, there's still 10,000 voters that said, yes, use that process. That's what we did. So there was a difference of opinion, and eventually we'll get this. So part of that, I'm sure, had to deal with the fact that they felt that the Asian population here in the city were not properly being represented, not getting a chance, especially as Ms. Hayashida was not picked as the replacement.
And again, as we know from the census data 10 years ago, from what the Asian population in the city was then and what it is now, oh my goodness.
That's voter approval.
I'm glad you can't see my face. But it has grown
Correct.
a significant amount in the last 10 years. So that, preparing for future growth in that is also an important point of that. So we have a number of people who have texted questions, so I'm going to share those. Is there a strict timeline that is pushing Cypress to make a decision? And please explain the timeline. So this is an interesting question, and thank you for the anonymous individual who sent it. There is a timeline that is listed in the CVRA, 90 days. However, as you have already said, Mr. Mayor, that you have gone through a very deliberative process, a very deliberate process at the moment, getting to this point, making sure the community had input, and then you will go through a deliberative process.
So part of the answer to that question is it is the 90 days, but through the work of our city manager and our city attorney, being in contact, primarily the city attorney, with Mr. Shankman's office, Mr. Shankman arranged to give us time to look into this.
And I think that's an important point, that the complaint has not been ignored, and you have
Correct.
not turned a blind eye to that. You have been in contact with him.
We've stayed in
keeping
touch
him
with
in
his
touch.
office,
Okay.
letting him know some of the things that we have done, some of the things that we're looking to do, and that we still need more time in order to get through this process. But is there a push by his office to get that done? Absolutely. And so we're trying to work with him.
Okay, that was really creepy. Is that what it is? Is it?
Yes,
Oh
the
my
thunder and
goodness.
lightning.
Okay. So for those of you watching at home, if you still have power, the weather's getting very interesting out here. Okay, next comment, also anonymous. According to the latest census, with the white population as 36.3%, Asians at 35.2%, and Latinos at 20%, and African Americans at 3.9% in the city of Cypress, 2/3 of our residents are from diverse backgrounds. Cypress website is incorrect. So this isn't a question, Mr. City Manager, this is a comment. So we will look into that. Thank you for letting us know. Next question, if it can be proven that Asian or other minority voters are not being diluted, then would we need to redistrict? Very good question. However, as we said in the video, very difficult to prove.
And that's where your input comes from. Does the majority of the residents want us to challenge that? Do the majority of the residents want us to simply say, you know what, we've got this letter, potentially it could cost us X number of dollars. Do we just say, yes, let's go to districts? Or, as some have clearly said, but we don't see that, we don't feel that. The Cypress hasn't done that, hasn't pushed back on any minority group, not allowing, so that is all of what this is, or part of all of what this is about, is getting your input to see where the community stands and what they'd like us to do.
Next question, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does the CVRA have a population minimum for redistricting before redistricting is required? So in other words, does the city or jurisdiction have to have a minimum population in order for the CVRA to be in effect, or to?
And the answer to that is no.
No.
If you look at the city immediately to our west, Los Alamitos, smaller town,
Very
beautiful
tiny.
town, but they are in districts. And so the answer to that is no.
Yes. Next question, we are not Santa Monica, so is spending millions on attorney fees a scare tactic?
I wouldn't say that it's a scare tactic. I would just say that, and these are things that we're looking at what it takes to get the information out and to make an informed decision.
Well, Well, I would also say that for one of the commenters who said we should fight, there are people, or that people feel differently. That's absolutely true. Some people feel very passionate on one side or another. But it is important that everyone makes an informed decision. You could feel very passionately that districts are not the right move for your city, but everyone needs to make an informed decision that it could be very costly. So that's not even a right or wrong question, that's just a factual,
right.
a factual consideration.
You know, to put together the PowerPoint, to have these town hall meetings, to be able to do it online, to be able to hire the demographer, to have, you know, the city attorney representing and responding to, all of those are monies that go into this, but those are all things necessary. One, to make sure that the city has not committed a violation. I think certainly that is paramount. That's important. People need to know, the residents need to know that we have not done this. Certainly not intentionally, but if we've even done it, then that's what we have found. We don't see that right now. Clearly the demographer showed that. But to take the next steps that we need to do to handle this and address this properly.
Mr. Bear, can I ask you for a time check?
Yes, it is. A little difficult to read with our light. There you go, 5:58.
And you have military time,
Yeah,
just making
sorry,
it harder
I'm
on me, so.
Old Navy guy.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we just have a few more questions, and I think that'll take us, unless we haven't, we'll go back to the room one more time. So the next question, also anonymous, is Cvra designed to protect only Asian voters? Absolutely not.
No.
It is meant to protect any voter in California, whether you're of a minority population of whatever.
Well, as you spoke to the city of Orange, the city of Santa Ana, the city of Anaheim, they had heavy Latino districts, and so it went to giving them better representation. So
Absolutely.
It absolutely has nothing to do with a particular culture or ethnic group.
The next question, in a district voting system, I could envision no qualified city council candidates running for city now. I'm assuming that means city council. What happens then? And this question came up when we had our first public forum. And what would happen in that particular case is we would go back and fall back onto the city charter, which does already have a process lined out for such a.
And I'm sure that the city charter would have to be amended because we don't currently talk about voting by district. But has that happened before? Well, there have been times because, again, like some of the other residents here, I've been a long-time resident now and certainly worked for the city prior.
Where you've had vacancies.
Correct. And then you've also had it where you've had people that ran unchallenged. So there are a number of things that would go back to the city as far as selecting it. Is there a chance that you could have somebody that's unqualified? I'm sure there is. It's a reality. It's a fact of life. We don't like to see it. We'd always like to think that the best people are there to represent our interests in the city. But it's very much a possibility, yes.
So I will let Katie Shapiro have our last online question, and that is, can you commit to having an independent commission with leaders from or outside this community drawing district lines? And I don't think you would be able to commit now to something like that, and certainly I think most residents would want a voice in that.
Absolutely. Again, that's a question that's down the road, for if we decide to go to districting. And so, yes, we will certainly look at that. We certainly, again, can I commit to us certainly wanting the input? That's why we're here, ladies and gentlemen. We're asking you for that now, and we'll ask for that input all throughout this process.
But I would share, just from the standpoint of just educating, that what's interesting about the independent commissions, because we just went through that here in the state of California, they don't always have the local knowledge of what are communities that are really tightly bound together. So for an example, in my town, they just drew the new Senate and Assembly lines, and they went right down the middle of the street in one of the most kind of really tight-knit areas of our city, which was very surprising. The same would be held true for Cypress. There are places that you as residents know better than anybody and can give that input into the drawing process of maps. So all of that would be taken into consideration before a final decision would be made.
Right, and if Ms. Shapiro, you're referring to the independent, meaning having some of the residents there, certainly, again, it's that issue of, yes, we want the input from the residents of the city.
So that's all the questions I have, but I will turn back to the room just to ask one final time if there's any other questions. And I did want to make it a point too that the city council members will stay after. I'm sure you have other questions that you might like to ask, and they are happy to take those questions and speak with you a little bit more informally. And to close out our meeting, I just wanted to remind our viewers that even though if you didn't send a question in for this particular meeting, you still have an opportunity to provide your voice. So you can either do that by joining us at our third and final community meeting, which will be at the city's community center.
On the 26th.
On the 26th.
Saturday.
That's a Saturday. So we've tried to make these all a little different to make it easier for everyone to participate at a different time and place.
I believe it's 10 a.m.?
Yes.
10 a.m.
And that is available, that information is on the city website. All of these are being filmed, so those will be on the city website. You can still text a comment at any time at 714-699-3607, or you can send an email to cvraforum@cypressca.org. And finally, I mentioned it before, it was in the video, we have set up a survey. There are QR codes on the table right outside this room, and there are links directly on the city's website if you go to cypressca.org/election system. And there are links there directly to the survey as well. We've had a number of people already participate in that and really good feedback, so we appreciate everyone who's already taken the time to do that.
Correct. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out tonight. And again, as Ariana pointed out, my fellow council members will remain here. So if you want to ask us questions, come up to us, talk to us, share more, give us your input. That's clearly what we're here for. So again, thank you and good luck with the weather going home. Thank you.
Thank you.